Hey friends, today I wanted to tell you about a book that I recently read. It's called Digital Body Language, which may sound like a slightly unusual title, but basically what it's all about is digital communication. And I think that it's really valuable, really for anyone, so not just my normal audience, which is researchers, PhD students, academics, but pretty much anyone who is engaging in any kind of digital communication. Really thinking a lot about email, but a lot of it applies pretty nicely to things like Facebook and Instagram, social media, Twitter as well. So getting into this book really reminded me of a segment by a comedian called Jim Owen, which if you jump on YouTube, search Jim Owen eyebrows, you can see his segment about eyebrows. And I'm not going to ruin the punchlines here, other than to say that when you communicate things, depending on whether you have your eyebrows up or your eyebrows down, the same words can mean completely different things. And this is really a good metaphor for a decent chunk of this book. So here is an example where just a single word presented different ways to answer a question can maybe mean different things. So you could imagine that someone has asked something of you, and you might say, sure. But you might have said, they might see how you've written sure, and they might think you said, sure. Or you might have said, sure. So just different things, just punctuation, capital letters, stuff like that can really make a bit of a difference to your communication. So jumping into some of the things that I have learned, some of the key points and takeaways that I took from this book, the biggest was this phrase that careful reading is the new listening. And I think you could all remember times where you've sent an email to someone and they have sent you some sort of absolute nonsense response, and it's clear that they just glanced at the email and they didn't read it properly. And so this, along with a lot of these other key takeaways, really might seem like common sense, but I think being mindful and reflective of when you're using any kind of digital communication, but particularly email, will really help you in whether it's in your social life, but I think particularly in your professional life or your academic life. So careful reading is the new listening. So making a point of reading things carefully. The next thing that the book details, both in terms of the perspectives of the author, but also with a lot of this, the research that's been done as well, is using appropriate greetings and sign-off. So when is it okay to say hey versus hello or hi or greetings, regards, cheers, best wishes. There's lots of different greetings, and in some ways it doesn't make a big deal, but sometimes it is those little things, particularly when you're dealing with someone who's not familiar, that can kind of give some context and change how they might respond. Something that is really you wouldn't think about as a sender but would often think about as a receiver is the tone of an email. So often you may send a message and you might be sending it very neutrally, maybe even friendly, but the person receiving it reads something completely differently. So the book really gets into how easy it is to sound unintentionally passive-aggressive. So what kind of things do I need to look for and avoid saying and using so that my emails don't come across as a little bit rude or passive-aggressive when responding to requests? When we are thinking about our audience, there is definitely research, and they talk in the book about research on the level of familiarity, so how well you know someone, but also whether it's a high or a low trust relationship. So is it family or friends, or is it something where it's business related? Also whether there's a cultural context. So with different cultures, different pieces of slang, different emojis can mean very different things. So just having a little bit of awareness around those. Speaking of awareness of things like emojis, really paying attention to detail. So like in that previous page, those examples of sure written in different ways, the use of punctuation, capitals, and emojis can really change how an email is received. The last one, and one that I think a lot of people could really take away, is acknowledgement of effort. So sometimes someone might send you a particularly long, thought out email. It might have several paragraphs. Sometimes you might look at it and you might go, oh no, this is a lot of reading. But they've put some effort into trying to communicate something to you. Sometimes it might also be associated to some real world work. So they might be telling you about something outside of the email that they've done, particularly in a work context. They've put a lot of effort, a lot of work. They wanted to tell you something about it, and how important this is to acknowledge. So when someone sends you a particularly long email, or an email that is about something that they've put a lot of work and effort into, what a big difference it can make to your relationship with them just by acknowledging. So for you, if you are managing possibly staff, I guess even if you have students that you're communicating with, making an acknowledgement of the effort that they've put in. So when someone sends you that long email, and I mean this may have happened to you as well, getting a one-word response, or in fact sometimes the classic one I can think of is someone that would send the one-letter response. So they didn't even write OK, they just wrote the letter K. And that was their standard reply for things where they wanted to acknowledge they received it. They sent K. But this is a little bit off-putting if it's something we've actually put a lot of effort in. So I think that's probably the biggest, other than the careful reading, this is probably the biggest takeaway for me, is being a little bit more considerate where someone has put effort either into an email, or it's an email about something they've put a lot of effort into, and just taking the time, just even a sentence, acknowledging the effort that they've put in. I think that'll make a big difference, and especially when it is a relationship that you want to foster and grow over time. So I would definitely recommend this book. Pretty much anyone is going to be using digital communication, and I think pretty much anyone will take some valuable points away from it. So Digital Body Language, as I said at the start, slightly unusual title, but definitely well worth a read.